Hi there, my name is Satyanarayan and this is yet another video on the theoretical portion of contracts, an important topic for your legal aptitude section of law entrance exams. In today's video, we're going to take a look at free consent. So what exactly is the requirement of free consent? Well, according to the Indian Contracts Act, it says that there must be free consent on both the parties who are entering into the agreement for it to be valid as a contract. Hence, free consent means literally that the people are entering into the contract on their own volition. Now, there are 5 ways in which free contract can be vitiated. But before we go into that, let's understand what exactly happens when there is an absence of free consent. Well, either you could lead to a situation where the contract is void or it becomes voidable. So in case there was a mistake, and we'll look into detail what exactly a mistake is, but supposing the mistake was proven, then it leads to a void contract, which means that even if both the parties wish to continue, they cannot. The law says that this contract is a nullity. On the other hand, if the free consent was vitiated because of something like fraud, misrepresentation, coercion, or undue influence, then in that case, it becomes a voidable contract. And voidable contract means it gives the party whose consent has not been freely given the option to either accept or reject the contract, which means that till such time the affected party rejects the contract remains valid and enforceable. So all you have to remember right now is that in case of mistake, it becomes a void contract. It is as if the contract never existed and the parties are in the same position as they would have been had they never entered into such a contract. In other circumstances, it is a voidable contract where it is up to the affected party to reject the contract, and till time he does not do so, the contract remains valid and enforceable. So, one of the essentials of a valid contract as mentioned in section 10 is that the parties should enter into the contract with their consent. So, according to section 14, consent is said to be free when it is not caused by coercion, which is defined in section 15, undue influence as defined in 16, fraud as defined in 17, misrepresentation as defined in section 18, and mistake, which is subject to the provisions of section 20, 21, and 22. Now, while you need not remember the exact section numbers, we'll just look at the definitions of what is meant by each of these terms. So, consent is said to be so caused when it would not have been given but by the existence of such coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, or mistake. So, the first term that we saw was coercion. And to remember coercion, remember that it is a force that is forbidden by the IPC, the Indian Penal Code. So coercion technically is the committing or threatening to commit any act which is forbidden by the IPC. For example, if you unlawfully detain or threaten to detain the property of a person, or you threaten somebody with suicide, you threaten to hurt somebody, all these are actions which are forbidden by the IPC. So when you use such force to force the other person into entering into a contract with you, then it is coercion, and because of coercion, it becomes a voidable contract. So, let us assume that A on board an English ship on the high seas caused B to enter into an agreement by an act which was equivalent of criminal intimidation under the IPC. Then in such case, A has indeed employed coercion, and what he has done leads to the contract becoming voidable. So, coercion in short is a force which is forbidden by the IPC. Undue influence. Now, this is a very subtle form of force. For that, we first need to understand certain terms. The first one being fiduciary relation. Fiduciary comes from the word fide, which means trust. So, a fiduciary relationship is a relationship based on trust. For example, the relationship between a doctor and a patient is considered to be a fiduciary relationship because the patient trusts the doctor to do him no harm. Similarly, the relationship between a lawyer and a client, because the client trusts all his secrets to his lawyer. The relationship between a teacher and a student, or a religious guru and a disciple. So all these relationships are based upon trust, and hence they are fiduciary relationships. The second condition necessary is that there must be a dominant position that one person enjoys over the other, which means they cannot be equals in that relationship. For example, two siblings are in a relationship which may be defined as fiduciary, but they are definitely not in a position dominant or subversive to the other, right? So a brother and a sister, or a sister and a sister, or a brother and a brother, generally because are not in dominant position over each other, will not fall under this. But a lawyer and a client, the lawyer always holds some sort of power over the client. The doctor is always in a dominant position over the patient, and so on. So, in the fiduciary relationship, there must be a dominant position. And the person who was in the dominant position in the fiduciary relationship, if he or she takes undue advantage of that position to make the other person enter into a contract, then such a contract has no free consent and undue influence can be said to have occurred. For example, let us say I go to a doctor who is the only person capable of treating me for a particular illness. Every time I go to this doctor, I'm wearing an expensive watch which is worth about a lakh rupees. The doctor notices on my wrist this watch and asks whether I would be ready to sell him the watch for 100 rupees. Now, ordinarily, such a request will simply be turned down. But here, I'm in a position where I may not be able to refuse him. Now, please note, he has not openly threatened me. He hasn't said anything which may be construed as a direct threat. But there is a subtle influence here. Me being the patient under his care may be afraid of the consequences, although he has not said anything. So, if I'm not able to refuse it, I may have to enter into the agreement. But at a later position, at a later date, if I want to get out of this agreement, can I do so? The answer is yes. There was a fiduciary relationship between us. The doctor was definitely in a dominant position, and to a rational man, the actions of the doctor may seem as taking undue advantage of the patient. Hence, this is undue influence, a subtle form of coercion. Fraud is intentional deception. All you have to remember is that fraud means and includes any act committed by a party to a contract with the intention to deceive the other person to enter into the contract, which means it could be a suggestion of a fact which is not true by one who does not believe it to be true, or active concealment of a fact by a person who has knowledge of it, or making a promise without any intention of performing it, right? So if I know something to be false and yet represent it as being true, then because I had full knowledge of what I was doing, the act which I have committed is fraud. Misrepresentation is unintentional deception. Now, the difference between fraud and misrepresentation is whether you had knowledge of what you were doing. Let us assume that I have a car and there is a fault in the engine of the car, but I do not know about this, right? I repeat, I don't know about the fault in the car. Now, when a person comes up to me and wants to buy the car and asks whether there is any problem, without knowing that there is a fault and without taking the trouble to verify the facts, I say there is no fault. Now, here I did not intentionally deceive because I did not have knowledge. However, I should not have answered the way I did. I should have taken out time to verify the facts. Or I could simply have said, I do not know. Right? In such a case, although the facts are that there is a fault, I unintentionally said something which I thought was true but was not. So this is misrepresentation. Had I known about the fault and lied that there is no fault, then I would be guilty of fraud. But because I did not know about it and without verifying facts asserted something to be true which turned out to be false, what I'm guilty of is misrepresentation. Finally, we come to mistake, one of the only things which makes a contract void. It means absence of consensus ad idem. Consensus ad idem literally means meeting of minds. That is, both the parties who wish to enter into the contract are thinking about the same object in the same sense. Now, supposing I have two cars, one is black and one is white, and I wish to sell the black car. So I tell a person, I wish to sell my car. Do you wish to buy it? The other person is intending to purchase my white car. So he says, yes, I'm interested. And then when I take the money from him and deliver the black car, it turns out that it was not what he had expected. Now, in my mind, I thought I was selling my black car. whereas he thought that I was selling my white car. Right? So the object of the entire contract, which is the car, is not the same. We are thinking about two different things. And hence, because of absence of consensus ad idem, absence of meeting of minds, this is a mistake, and both the parties are not in a position to continue with the contract. Hence, this contract will be called a void contract. So that pretty much are the 5 conditions which can vitiate free consent. In absence of any of these conditions, there is free consent for the contract between the parties, and one of the essential requirements for a valid contract is fulfilled. Wish you all the best. Have a good day.